Hi everyone and welcome to BitKnits. Today we're going to make these really cute garter stitch knitted envelopes. These are really fun little project as gift card holders. You can also chain them all up into sort of like an advent calendar. You don't need very much yarn. You can use scrap yarn that you have left over. You can mix and match colors and you can really create some fun and unique little knitted envelopes. As you can see, I've made large ones, I've made smaller ones, medium-sized ones. I played around with color and buttons. I've even played around with the little loop that we create at the end. So this one is a chain loop. So if you have a crochet hook available, you can easily join your yarn, chain 6 or 7, join back onto your main envelope, weave in your ends, and you have a chained loop that will go around your button. If you don't, and you want this to just be a knitted project, the one I'm going to show you today is this one, and you can just use a yarn needle and some excess yarn, so maybe even one of the ends that you cut off, and just sew one end on one stitch, leave about an inch or so of yarn, and then join, skip a stitch and join again back on your main top of your envelope, and you can just create a very simple little loop for your button that way as well. For this project, I am using a pair of knitting needles, and these in particular are a size 8 or a 5mm. Now you can play around with gauge, and really you can use any size knitting needle that you want, because you're just going to be casting on the width that you want for this envelope. So for example, on this one, I just cast it on until I had this length here as the width, and then you would work up, knitting back and forth, row after row, however big or long that you want your envelope to be, cast off, and then fold it up into an envelope. So this project is super customizable as well. So like I said, you'll just need a little bit of scrap yarn, whatever you have in your stash. If you run out mid-project, you can always swap another color and you get some really cool color effects as well. So I'm just going to be using a green and a red acrylic 4-weight yarn for this. The knitting needles, you'll also need a button, scissors, and a yarn needle to weave in your ends and sew up the seams. Once you have all that, we can get started. So I'm going to start with my green yarn, and I'm going to cast on any number of stitches. It can be even, it can be odd, it can be a lot, it can be a few. You just want to create the width of your envelope. So for a project like this, because it's just a scrap project for me, I just sort of pull my yarn, that tail end that we're going to use to cast on, and I just start casting on, and I don't even count. It doesn't matter how many stitches I have for this project. Now if you're going to make a bunch of these and you want them to all be the same width and height, then take notes of how many you cast on and how many rows you work and that sort of thing, so all of your little envelopes will be the same. So I've casted on all of my stitches. This is the end I had. Now I stopped earlier than I would have normally because this yarn started to split on me, so I just said, well, that's good enough. Now we're just going to work in the garter stitch. So to do that, you have your needle with all of your loops on your left hand. You grab your empty right-handed needle, and you're just going to work putting that needle through that loop, and you want to get your working yarn. So this tail we're just going to leave off to the side. Your working yarn is the one that's attached to the main ball of yarn. You're going to wrap that around and pull that loop off and onto your other needle. And you're just going to keep doing this for every stitch. And that is row 1 of the garter stitch, row 2, and every other row is exactly the same. So for the garter stitch, we're just knitting each stitch. Once you get to the end, you'll see that all of your loops are now on your right-handed needle and your left-handed needle is empty. We're going to flip everything, so switch needles, and do it all over again. So I'm always going to go in from the front, wrap my yarn, go back through and pull that loop off. And we're just knitting every stitch. So I'm going to work in this green for another 2 or 3 rows, and then I will show you how to change colors. I've worked another row. I'm going to go ahead and change colors at this point. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to put our needle in. I'm going to grab my new yarn and leaving a tail, a decent tail, so I can weave that in at the end. I'm going to wrap it around, so I just kind of laid it over that right-handed needle, and then I'm just going to pull it through, and you just got to be careful so you don't pull everything off, and then just tighten up those ends a little bit. Once you work a few stitches in your new color, it'll get a little bit easier. Just that end is a little fiddly with all those loose ends. But now we've changed colors. So you want to keep working all the way down, knitting each stitch back and forth. Do as many rows as you need to get a decent length so you can fold over your 2 ends to create sort of an envelope. And I will show you what that looks like in just a second. Once you've worked the garter stitch for a number of rows and you're happy with the size of your envelope when you fold it like this, and that will be your envelope, you can now fasten off. So we're going to cast off all of these loops on our needle, and to do that we're going to slip stitch that first loop, knit the next, take our needle and put it under that first loop, pull it over the one we just knit, and cast that one off. We're going to keep doing this same technique all the way down. So you knit and then you pull that first loop over the one you just made and off your needle. So you should always have one loop on your right-handed needle. As you're working these off, you're going to slip that one up and over, and then you can see we're getting a cast off edge on this side. So keep working one at a time, knit and then slip it over, knit and grab that loop and over. I've got one loop on each of my needles. I'm going to knit that last one off of my left-handed needle. Now this one's empty, but I need to pull this first one up and over. I've got one loop left, cut my yarn, and then you can just pull that needle and that yarn up, and now you've got your cast off edge. So you should have a rectangular piece of fabric that you can now fold to be an envelope. Once you have casted off your end, we can now fold it. And you can decide at this point if you like this wrong side facing forward. So you can see there's a nice clean color change up here on this side, and on the reverse side, while the stitch is the same, when you change colors you will get this extra line, and that's typically the wrong side, but it doesn't have to be. So choose the side that you want. So if the side that is facing up as you're lying this down will be the inside of your little envelope. And you can see that line right here, which was on the back, is now on the outside, and that's what it will look like if you use that side. Now I can go ahead, flip this over, and I'll show you what it looks like if you use that side. So again, doesn't matter, the stitch is the same on both sides, so it's however you like, whichever side you like the best. So I'm going to weave in my ends, fold up my sides. I'm going to seam these two sides, just whip stitch on both sides to close that up, and then I will show you how to put a little loop here, and we'll sew on our button and we'll have a little envelope. Once you've seamed up your two sides and woven in all of your extra tails, we can put the button on. So I've just grabbed a regular plastic button. You can use any button that you have. Most craft stores sell specialty buttons. So if you're making this into an advent calendar type project, you may want ones that have a little number on it. Now, if your button has the 4 holes or 2 holes in the middle, you're going to use those holes to sew the button onto your envelope. The only thing you need to be careful of is that that eye of the needle fits through the button, otherwise you won't be able to sew it. So just pick a needle that has a narrow eye at the top and just test it, make sure that you can get that needle in and out of your buttonholes. Place your button. I'm just going to work mine right dead center on this bottom piece here. I'm going to cut a fairly long piece of yarn, not terribly long, but I do want to be able to sew this in and out a few times just to make sure it's secure. So once your button is placed, come up, go inside, and find a buttonhole. So there is my first one. I'm going to pull that through, and I'm going to leave a tail so I can weave that securely at the end. Now you're going to want to find the hole that is right opposite. So I went up through this hole. I'm going to go diagonally opposite and down into that hole and out from the back. I'm going to go in, and I want to find either this or this hole, one of the unused ones. There we go. Pull it tight and then come down through the other diagonal hole and through the back, and you've secured your button. Now I like to go up once more through the first ones that I did, so on this diagonal, just to make sure that it is secure. And finding that can be difficult. Here we go. And down through the opposite one. And depending on the yarn, you may need to do this a few times if the yarn that you're using is not as rough and acrylic or whatever you're using. So this is a softer, thinner weight for acrylic yarn, this green, and so I just wanted to go up one more time through that to make sure that it was secure. It feels pretty secure now. I'm going to go ahead, flip this inside out so I can weave in my two ends here. I'm going to go ahead and knot these two a few times, and now I can just sort of weave in the tail, do the same with the other tail. I'm going to cut those ends, flip it back, and we've added our button. Now for the little button hook, if you know how to crochet, you can easily crochet a little hook right here. If you don't have a crochet hook, you just want this to be a 100% knitted project, then I suggest just grabbing some yarn, put it on your needle, and just create a little loop with your string, your yarn here. So I'm going to go in the middle, come up, leave a tail. I'm going to do that a few times. up through the same stitch, just to kind of secure it. Now you can kind of guess how long you need that loop, and then come back up through this, skip a stitch on that last end here. So I'm going to skip this stitch and I'm going to go right to the next stitch and pull that up. You don't want to do it too tight because you want this to be relatively loose so you can unlatch that button. And I'm just going to do the same thing, go up through that stitch a few times. And that's an easy way to create a little button loop if you don't want to crochet one. If you're going to crochet one, then you would do almost the same thing. You would join in one of these stitches in the middle and chain 6 or 7, and then skip a stitch and join in the next one over and weave in your ends, and then you'd have a little crocheted chain loop for your envelope. Super quick, super easy, great beginner knitting project. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Until next time, happy knitting. Bye.